When my mom looked right at me across the dinner table and said, "You're not half the woman your sister is," it landed like a cheap shot I'd already heard 100 times. The fork in my hand froze for a second, and I could see the pride in her eyes as she turned toward Peyton, my older sister, the golden child. Peyton sat there smiling like she'd just won some kind of invisible award again. Normally, I'd just chew whatever was on my plate, swallow it down with some bitterness, and keep quiet until I could sneak out after dessert. That was the family routine. They'd praise Peyton for being brilliant, successful, and practically saint-like, and I'd play the background character. But that night, something different happened. I pushed my chair back, and the screech of wood on tile cut through the room louder than anything else. I didn't yell, didn't lose it. I just looked at my mom and said, calm as ever, then let her cover the mortgage for you. It was like I'd thrown a grenade in the middle of the table. Peyton's fork hovered midair. My mom's eyes went wide, but it was my dad's face that stole the show. He went pale so fast you'd think he'd seen a ghost. He stammered, "Mortgage. What mortgage?" Now, before you think he was just being dramatic, let me tell you something. That question was real. He wasn't pretending. He genuinely looked confused, as if the idea of a mortgage payment was foreign territory. That's because for the past 3 years, I'd been the one quietly making sure those payments happened. Not Peyton, not the two people sitting across from me claiming lifelong parental authority, but me. And up until that moment, no one had dared say it out loud. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the whole table. Peyton blinked a couple times, her perfect smile fading, and then she dropped her eyes like this was suddenly none of her business. My mom leaned back, lips pressed tight, already looking like she regretted opening her mouth. My dad was still staring at me like I'd just confessed to murder. Let me back up for a second, because here's the thing. In my family, Friday night dinners aren't optional. Doesn't matter if I've been pulling 14-hour days at Fort Liberty, or if I just want a night to sit in my apartment in Fayetteville and drink a beer in peace. No, every Friday, I'm expected to drive out to the suburbs, sit at that long oak table, and listen to my parents list Peyton's achievements, as if she's personally solving world hunger. She's a lawyer, she bought a nice house, she has the kind of life you put in a Christmas letter to brag about. And me? I'm the army officer with the stable paycheck they can conveniently lean on but never brag about. Every time I said I had duty or couldn't make it, my mom would call, leave 20 missed calls, and act like missing one meal was the equivalent of abandoning the family. My dad, half joking, half serious, would say, "This family has a seat for you, don't leave it empty." Translation: show up, sit down, and keep quiet. So, yeah, when my mom dropped the line about me being not half the woman Peyton is, it wasn't some isolated insult, it was years of digs and comparisons rolled into one sentence. But instead of taking it like usual, I let it rip. And honestly, it felt good. I could feel the air shift the second I said it. Peyton tried to act like she didn't hear me, but the way her hand tightened around her wine glass told another story. My mom's fork clinked against her plate, and she gave me that look she always gives when she thinks I'm being too sensitive. My dad opened his mouth twice before he actually got the words out. "Mortgage? What mortgage?" His voice cracked a little, which was the cherry on top. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang, because for once, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain myself. I looked at Peyton, who shifted in her seat and avoided my eyes, then back at my parents. Finally, I leaned forward, rested my hand on the back of my chair, and said, "The one I've been covering for the last 3 years. That mortgage." Now if you're picturing jaws hitting the table, you're right on target. My dad blinked like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. My mom's face tightened, and Peyton finally looked up, her mouth half open but nothing coming out. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even mad in that moment. I was steady, calm, the same way I've been trained to be when briefing a commander or handing bad news in uniform. That calmness is what really rattled them. It's one thing when someone explodes. You can write that off as emotions. But when someone says something calmly, with no hesitation, that sticks. The funny thing is, it wasn't even about winning some dramatic family fight. It was about finally putting words to what I'd been carrying. I wasn't trying to score points or humiliate anyone. I was simply done sitting there while they handed my sister the halo and gave me scraps of respect. The room stayed quiet. You could hear the tick of the old wall clock, the one my mom insists gives the house character. Nobody moved. Peyton was still staring at her plate, my dad still frozen, and my mom looked like she was deciding whether to scold me or pretend this whole conversation hadn't happened. And me? I just sat back in my chair and waited. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one in the hot seat. They were. My dad's face was still pale, but my mind had already gone somewhere else, back to the night this whole mess started. It was winter of 2020. One of those nights where the air outside felt sharp and the world was already falling apart from the pandemic. I'd just gotten home from a late shift at Fort Liberty, still in uniform pants and a t-shirt, flipping through files on my laptop while trying to convince myself I wasn't too tired to eat. That's when my phone buzzed nonstop across the counter. Mom's name lit up the screen. She never called that late, not unless something was seriously wrong. When I picked up, her voice was trembling. "Jordan, we might lose the house. Your father's contract fell through. We don't have enough for the mortgage this month. If the bank doesn't get the payment, they'll send us a notice." I just stood there, staring at the wall like the words had to bounce around a couple times before landing. Mom sobbed into the phone. "Please, just this once. Help us keep the roof over our heads. After this, we'll figure it out." I could have said no. I could have reminded her I had my own plans, that I was saving for a down payment on a condo near base, that I wasn't exactly swimming in cash as a captain. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "I'll transfer it tomorrow." The relief in her voice was instant, and she repeated, "Thank you. Just this once. Thank you." Like she was trying to convince herself more than me. When I hung up, I stared at my laptop screen. My savings account number was right there in my mind. The years of cutting corners, skipping vacations, staying in crummy apartments just so one day I could buy my own place. Now, that dream took a back seat to the sound of my mom crying over the phone. The next morning, I logged into my bank, typed in their account number, and hit transfer. The amount stung, not because I didn't want to help, but because I knew what it cost me. But I told myself what any dutiful kid would. Family comes first. This was an emergency. It would get better. Except it didn't. The following month, another call. "Jordan, your father's business still hasn't picked up. Can you help just this once?" She said it the same way as before, like it was temporary, like she actually believed it. And I agreed again. By month 3, I stopped asking questions. By month 6, I had the payment scheduled automatically. Because why drag myself through the mental tug-of-war every time? I watched my savings account drain, month after month. Each time I saw the balance drop, I told myself, next month will be different. But the only thing that changed was my bank account. 3 months turned into 6. 6 turned into 12. By the second year, I'd sent enough money to buy a brand new truck in cash. Instead, all I had was the same tiny apartment near base, furniture that looked like it belonged in a freshman dorm, and a bank account that refused to grow. I kept waiting for acknowledgement, some kind of thank you at those Friday dinners. But every time I sat at that oak table, my parents praised Peyton's career, her big new cases at the law firm, the way she decorated her house in Wilmington. Me? Not a word. No one said, "Hey, thanks for saving us from foreclosure." No one said, "We appreciate you putting your life on hold for us." Nothing. There was one night, maybe a year in, when my dad called me directly. His voice sounded heavier than usual. "Jordan, I hate asking again, but this month is bad. If we lose the house, your mother will fall apart." He promised it would be the last time. I didn't even argue. I just nodded, staring out my apartment window at the parking lot, wondering how many times the last time was supposed to mean. 3 years, 36 transfers, $84,000. That's what just this once turned into. Every dollar came out of my paycheck. Pay that was supposed to help me build something for myself. Pay I earned by putting on a uniform every morning, saluting higher-ups, working weekends, filling out endless reports, and taking responsibility for soldiers and equipment. None of it mattered in that house. In that house, I was still the lesser daughter. Ender. One weekend, Peyton showed up to dinner flashing pictures of her new place on her phone. Everyone gathered around to see the granite countertops and open floor plan. My parents beamed like she'd just discovered fire. I sat there, nodding, chewing my food, thinking about the fact that my money had been paying for the house they were sitting in right then, but no one cared. That night on my drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I kept asking myself why I let it go so far, why I couldn't say no, why I kept putting them first when they never put me anywhere near the spotlight. The simple answer was guilt. Every time my mom's voice cracked on the phone, every time my dad mentioned losing the house, I felt like it was my duty to step in. But sitting there at that dinner table, listening to my mom tell me I wasn't half the woman my sister was, I realized guilt was the only reason they'd been able to keep me hooked. They'd leaned on me because I let them. And I let them because I didn't want to be the one to let the family home vanish. I thought back to that first phone call, the sound of my mom crying, the panic in her voice. I remembered the weight in my chest when I promised her I'd help. I remembered the hope I had when I thought it would be just this once. And as my dad sat there pale and stammering at the dinner table in the present, all of that came rushing back like it had never left. I kept my eyes on my dad, but the numbers were already running in the back of my head like a calculator stuck on repeat. 3 years, 36 transfers, $84,000. Every single dime wired straight from my paycheck into their account, while I sat in my cramped apartment watching my own future shrink month by month. It's amazing how quickly sacrifice can turn into routine. At first, I'd feel a sting when I clicked transfer. Then after a while, the sting dulled, replaced by a kind of numbness. It wasn't that I stopped caring, it was that I couldn't keep caring every single month without breaking down. So I automated it. The money left my account on the 15th like clockwork, and I didn't even have to think about it. Except I did. I thought about it every time I opened my bank app and saw my balance refusing to climb. There were things I wanted, things that would have been normal for anyone my age. I wanted to buy a place of my own, stop renting, start building equity like every financial advisor says you should. I wanted to get married to the guy I was dating at the time, who actually asked me about looking at houses together once. But every time those conversations came up, I found myself dodging, making excuses because I knew my savings weren't there. How could I explain to him that my money was disappearing into a black hole labeled family mortgage, a debt that technically wasn't even mine? He didn't stick around, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. He wanted a partner who could plan a future, not someone silently bankrolling her parents while pretending everything was fine. So that relationship ended with a quiet conversation on my couch, the kind where nobody raises their voice because both people already know it's over. Meanwhile, Peyton's Life was the family's favorite movie, and I was stuck watching it on repeat every Friday. She closed her first big case at the law firm. They toasted with wine. She bought a house in Wilmington. They practically threw a parade. She redid her kitchen with subway tiles. Mom gushed like Peyton had built the place with her bare hands. I never said anything. I'd show up in uniform, sit at the table, eat my mom's cooking, nod along to their stories, and then drive home with my stomach in knots. Not from the food, but from the silence I carried. Every once in a while, I'd think about dropping the truth right there at the table, telling them it was me, not Peyton, keeping their home from foreclosure. But then I'd imagine the awkward stares, the denial, the way they'd twist it into something I chose to do, and I'd swallow it down like I always did. Still, it ate at me. Every sacrifice had a face. The weekend trip to Asheville I said no to because I couldn't justify the expense. The master's program in finance I kept pushing off because tuition felt impossible. The nicer apartment I passed on when my landlord raised rent because I couldn't scrape together a bigger deposit. Each one was a reminder that I wasn't living for myself. I was living to keep my parents' roof over their heads, while they told the world it was Peyton who carried the family. There was one particular night I remember, late shift at the office, spreadsheets piled high, everyone else gone. My phone buzzed. It was Dad. His voice was lower than usual, almost raspy. "Jordan, I hate asking again, but this month is bad. If we lose the house, your mother will fall apart. I promise, just this month. Just this month." The same line every time, like a broken record. I remember staring out the office window at the empty parking lot, feeling pity and anger at the same time. Pity because my dad sounded defeated. Anger because I was once again the safety net. I said yes, like I always did, even though my gut screamed not to. And that's the thing about family. They know exactly which buttons to push. Guilt, duty, loyalty. It's not like they were holding a gun to my head. but they didn't have to. They had my heart, and they knew it. The total crept higher. 10,000, 20, 50. By the time I hit 84, I couldn't even process the number anymore. It was abstract, like Monopoly money, except it wasn't. It was real, and it was mine, and it was gone. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the invisibility. Sitting there every week listening to my mom brag about Peyton's victories while never once acknowledging the quiet sacrifice happening right under her nose. Watching my dad beam about Peyton's career while conveniently forgetting the mortgage that magically stayed paid. Hearing my sister talk about redecorating her living room while my savings bled out month after month. One Friday, Peyton showed up all smiles, scrolling through photos of her new house. "Look at this backyard," she said, passing her phone around the table. My parents lit up like she'd just bought the White House. I smiled politely, handed the phone back, and bit my tongue so hard it almost bled. On the drive home, headlights flashing past on the highway, I realized something. My entire adult life was being mortgaged too. My future, my dreams, my relationships, all mortgaged to cover someone else's mistakes. And nobody even knew. Or worse, they knew and didn't care. I pulled into my apartment lot, sat in the car with the engine running, and stared at the dashboard. The smell of fast food from the bag on the passenger seat filled the car, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. My throat was too tight. All I could do was sit there, gripping the steering wheel, wondering how long I'd let this keep happening. Back at the dinner table, staring at my dad's pale face, I knew exactly how long it had been. 3 years, 36 payments, $84,000, and not a single word of thanks. The silence after my words could have cracked glass. My father's lips parted like he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. My mother shook her head, like she was watching a child tell a silly lie. "Jordan, that's not fair," she finally said, her voice trembling. "We never asked you to do that." That line hit me harder than I expected. My chest burned, my stomach flipped, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "You did ask. 3 years ago. Every single month after that. Maybe you didn't phrase it like a demand, but you knew what those calls meant." Dad leaned back, crossing his arms, his voice low but sharp. "We appreciate you helping once or twice. But dragging it up here? At the table? That's disrespectful." I laughed. Actually laughed, which I guess wasn't the reaction they were expecting. "Disrespectful? You've spent my entire life comparing me to Peyton like I'm some knockoff brand, and now you're telling me I'm out of line because I finally tell the truth?" Peyton shifted in her seat, eyes darting around like she was hoping someone would rescue her from the blast radius. She didn't say a word. Of course she didn't. Mom's voice cracked as she tried again. "You're too sensitive, Jordan. We've always been proud of you. But Peyton's career is visible. People understand it." End quote. I could feel the muscles in my jaw clench so tight it hurt. So the hours I worked, the money I gave, the life I put on hold that's invisible? Just because I don't have a shiny award or a courtroom victory, it doesn't count? Dad slammed his palm on the table, silverware rattling. "Enough. We're not turning dinner into a financial audit. If you wanted thanks, you should have said so before. Don't twist this into an attack." And I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape of wood on tile cutting through the heavy air. "I didn't want thanks," I said, my voice low. "I wanted respect. I wanted to matter in this family as much as your golden child. But I see it now. No matter what I do, it'll never be enough for you." The words came out steady, but inside I was shaking. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my throat. My mom looked away, her fork still in her hand, motionless. My dad glared, but even he didn't have another word ready. Peyton's face stayed fixed in that awkward, frozen half-smile, like she'd just realized her pedestal wasn't as secure as she thought. I stood up, grabbed my bag from the back of the chair, and walked out of the dining room. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, past the family photos where Peyton's framed certificates and awards were always hung front and center. I didn't stop to look. I didn't want to. In the car, gripping the steering wheel, I realized I'd just drawn a line I couldn't erase. I had said out loud what I'd been choking on for years. And their response? Denial? Dismissal? A pat on the head like I was a child making up stories. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual. Every red light seemed to last an eternity. Every green blurred past me before I even noticed. My phone buzzed twice, once with a text from Mom, then one from Dad. I didn't look. I couldn't. I knew exactly what they would say. Something about me overreacting, being ungrateful, needing to calm down. When I finally stepped into my apartment, I tossed my keys on the counter and collapsed into the chair by the window. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of years crashing into me all at once. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and scrolled to the scheduled payments tab. The screen glowed with the same monthly transfer I had been funding since 2020. Right there, bold as daylight, like a monument to my silence. My cursor hovered over the cancel button. My heart raced like I was about to jump out of a plane. I clicked. A prompt popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? I hit yes. And just like that, 3 years of obligation ended in the span of a second. Relief didn't come right away. At first, it felt like I'd cut off a limb. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen, numb. Then slowly, something else crept in. Not joy, not yet, but something close: freedom. For the first time, I wasn't tied to their financial lifeline. I grabbed the folder I'd kept stashed away in the bottom drawer of my desk. Every bank statement, every printed transfer slip, organized by month. I laid them out on the table, pages covering every inch of the surface. The numbers stared back at me: 500, 1,000, 200, 2,000, month after month. The total at the bottom, in my own scribbled handwriting, $84,000. I leaned forward, tracing the numbers with my finger. That money could have been my down payment. It could have been grad school. It could have been a wedding. Instead, it was buried in a house where I'd always been a shadow. But staring at those pages, I didn't just feel bitterness. I felt clarity. This was the evidence, the receipts, the truth. They refused to acknowledge. They could deny it all they wanted, but numbers don't lie. And one day I promised myself they wouldn't be able to brush this off. I stacked the papers neatly, slid them back into the folder, and placed it in the center of the table. My apartment was silent, but not the suffocating kind of silence I used to feel. This one was different. It was mine. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. My chest still ached, but the heaviness I'd carried for 3 years felt a little lighter. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if my parents would call, if Peyton would try to smooth things over, or if the family dinners would carry on without me like nothing had happened. What I did know was this: I was done being invisible, done carrying a weight that wasn't mine, done sitting in the shadows while my sister basked in the spotlight. And if my parents thought I would crawl back quietly, they were about to find out they were wrong. The morning sun cut through the blinds and woke me before my alarm. I rolled out of bed with a heavy head but a strangely light chest, as if canceling that transfer had untied a rope around my ribs. My apartment felt different too. It wasn't bigger, it wasn't nicer, but it was mine in a way it hadn't been the night before. I brewed coffee and sat at the dining table, staring at the folder of bank statements still sitting there. Part of me wanted to shove it back in the drawer and pretend none of it had ever happened. But another part of me, the louder part now, wanted to keep it out as a reminder, not of what I'd lost, but of what I wasn't willing to lose anymore. When I logged into my account later that morning, the absence of the scheduled payment felt like a victory in itself. The 15th of the month would come, and this time, my money would stay put. No frantic midnight calls, no text messages with just this once in the subject line. It would be mine, and for the first time in years, I could actually plan a future that wasn't swallowed by my parents' mortgage. At work, I carried myself differently. I noticed it when I walked into the office. Uniform neat, posture straight, and a strange, quiet confidence in my stride. My coworkers greeted me the same way they always did, but I didn't feel like the same person. The weight of secrecy was gone. Later that week, during a morning briefing, my mentor, Colonel Knox, pulled me aside. He was one of those leaders who had seen it all: deployments, logistics, nightmares, soldiers cracking under pressure, and nothing ever rattled him. "Hale," he said, looking me square in the eye. "You seem sharper lately. Focused. What changed?" I gave a half smile. "Cut some dead weight, sir." He raised an eyebrow, then nodded once, as if he knew better than to pry. "Good. Whatever it was, Keep it that way. The army eats enough out of people. Don't give it more than it deserves. His words stuck with me. The army already demanded discipline, sacrifice, long hours, and deployments that yanked me away from any chance at a normal life. And I had been doubling that weight by carrying my parents' mortgage on top of it. Knox was right, no one can keep giving until there's nothing left. At night, I started reclaiming the hours that used to feel stolen. I signed up for a boxing class at the gym off base, where the sound of gloves hitting pads drowned out every bitter memory of being dismissed at that dinner table. I ran along the river trail near my apartment, my breath sharp in the cold air, feeling more alive with every step. I even pulled out old applications for grad school programs I'd shoved in a drawer years earlier, letting myself imagine that door wasn't locked forever. Money wasn't pouring in any faster than before, but for the first time, it wasn't pouring out behind my back either. Each paycheck was like a vote of confidence in my own future. The savings account ticked upward slowly, but the sight of it made me feel steady again. I'd be lying if I said the anger was gone. It wasn't. Some nights, I'd sit at the table with those statements spread out and feel the sting of every dollar I'd lost. I'd think about the vacations I never took, the apartment I never bought, the years I couldn't get back. And then I'd picture that banner they hung for Peyton, the one that credited her for preserving the family home. That image burned hotter than anything else. But instead of letting it crush me, I let it sharpen me. Anger, when directed, can be fuel. Every jab in boxing, every late night working on a financial project at the office, every mile on the trail, I poured it all into proving to myself that my sacrifices wouldn't define me. I noticed the shift at work, too. When I wasn't drained by secret payments and endless guilt, I had more energy to pour into my job. I volunteered for tougher assignments. I stayed late when a logistics plan hit a snag. And when Knox walked past my desk one night and saw me piecing together a complex budget analysis for a supply line issue, he just said, "This is why you'll go far, Hale. You don't fold." That one compliment meant more to me than any praise I'd ever heard at a family dinner. Weekends became mine again. I hiked with friends from the unit, sat around bonfires with them, and laughed harder than I had in years. For once, I wasn't canceling plans because of money I didn't have. I wasn't making excuses about being too busy when really I was just too broke from covering someone else's responsibilities. Even my relationship with Peyton shifted, though not in a way she realized. At the next family dinner, she was her usual self, talking about clients, renovations, all the glitter that came with being the golden child. But when she glanced at me, maybe expecting the same quiet nods, she found a steadier gaze instead. I didn't snap at her. I didn't interrupt. I just looked back with a calmness that unsettled her. It was the calm of someone who didn't need her approval, or our parents anymore. When dinner ended, Mom called after me as I grabbed my coat. "Jordan, you're not still upset, are you?" Her tone was the same dismissive one she'd used for years, the one that labeled me as too sensitive. I turned, not angry, not shouting, just clear. "I'm not upset, I'm done." She blinked like she didn't understand. Maybe she didn't. Driving home that night, I realized something important. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I wasn't competing with Peyton for their approval, or waiting for my parents to suddenly wake up and recognize my worth. I was building something that had nothing to do with them. My own career, my own money, my own future. And as much as they tried to dismiss me, I knew this. The numbers didn't lie. 80, $4,000, 36 payments, 3 years of sacrifice. That truth was mine, and one day, it wouldn't stay hidden. For now, though, I didn't need their applause. The silence of my own apartment, the steady hum of a life I was finally steering for myself, that was enough. The clatter of boots on the drill floor snapped me back to focus, but this time I wasn't dragging the weight of family drama behind me. I was sharper, quicker, more present. When you cut out the constant drain, you realize how much energy you still have in reserve. Our unit was prepping for a logistics inspection, the kind where one missed detail could tank your entire evaluation. Normally, I'd be stretched thin, distracted by thoughts of rent, transfers, or whether I could even cover groceries if my parents asked again. But standing there with the checklist in my hand, I felt steady. Every box ticked, every supply record squared away, every movement deliberate. Colonel Knox noticed. He always did. After the inspection wrapped, he called me into his office. His tone was blunt but not unkind. Hale, you've got initiative. You've been operating like a soldier who wants more than just the minimum. You thought about putting in for Fort Belvoir yet? Openings are coming up. The mention caught me off guard. Fort Belvoir meant DC proximity, higher visibility, bigger opportunities in finance and logistics operations. It also meant uprooting everything I knew in North Carolina. But instead of hesitating, I felt that same steady hum inside me. I've thought about it, sir, I said. I'm ready when the chance comes. He nodded once, the kind of nod that meant he believed me. Outside his office, the rest of the unit ribbed me for staying late again, but I didn't care. That night, I stayed in the empty briefing room with a stack of reports, fine-tuning supply numbers for a coming operation. The silence of the room didn't feel lonely, it felt earned. Off-duty, my world kept expanding. The boxing classes left me sore but stronger, and hiking with friends started to feel like a ritual of reclaiming weekends that used to vanish into stress. When someone joked about how disciplined I was, I laughed. They had no idea how much discipline it had taken to keep paying a mortgage in secret for 3 years. Compared to that, showing up for a 6 a.m. run was child's play. Even my apartment started to reflect the shift. I cleared out piles of things I never really wanted, but had kept because I thought they made me look like the responsible daughter. I replaced them with things I actually liked: plants, a sturdy oak desk, a new mattress I'd put off buying for too long. None of it was flashy, but all of it was mine. The next family dinner was less tense than I'd imagined. My parents acted like nothing had ever been said. Peyton dominated the conversation as usual, showing photos of her latest case team, her dog, her perfect little Wilmington house. I watched quietly, but not with the bitterness I used to feel. I was detached now, like I was observing a rerun I'd already seen too many times. At one point, Dad looked at me across the table. Jordan, you still working those long hours? You should learn from your sister, balance things a little. I met his eyes and smiled, not fake, but firm. I'm balancing things just fine. He didn't press. Maybe it was the way I said it. Maybe it was the fact that for once I didn't look like I was begging for his approval. Driving home afterward, I didn't feel gutted or angry. I felt untouchable. They could hang banners, toast Peyton, spin whatever story they wanted, but I wasn't shackled to it anymore. Back at the office, the recognition grew louder. A senior officer stopped me in the hallway after I presented a financial plan for a supply chain reroute. That was sharp. Hale. You've got a future beyond this post. It wasn't flattery, it was validation. And it mattered because it was based on my work, not family name dropping, not pity, not manipulation, just me, standing on my own. One night, Knox found me still in the logistics office past 8 p.m. Sleeves rolled up, highlighter marks all over the spreadsheets. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You ever going to go home? I looked up, half grinning. This is me going home. He smirked. That fire you've got, don't lose it. The army will try to grind it out of you, but if you hold on to it, you'll outlast everyone else. That stuck with me more than anything. Outlast. Not outshine, not outplay, just outlast. I'd already been doing it my whole life without realizing it, gritting through comparisons, pushing through silence, carrying weight no one saw. If I could survive all that, thriving here almost felt easy. Week by week, I felt the old Jordan slipping away, the one who swallowed her words at family dinners, who lived paycheck to paycheck because of someone else's choices, who doubted her own worth every time Peyton's name was mentioned. In her place, a sharper version stood up. Someone who wasn't looking for applause, just the freedom to build her own path. Late one evening, I jogged along the river trail, cool air biting at my lungs, headlights flickering from the bridge above. My legs burned, my chest ached, but instead of slowing down, I pushed harder. Because the truth was, every mile I ran, every spreadsheet I nailed, every punch I landed in boxing was proof I wasn't broken by what happened. I was stronger for it. And as the skyline faded behind me, I knew this wasn't just survival anymore. This was the start of something bigger. The knock on my apartment door came on a Saturday afternoon, right when I was putting away groceries. Mrs. Whitman, my parents' neighbor from back in North Carolina, stood there smiling politely, holding her phone. Jordan, honey, I thought you should see this. Drove by your folks' place earlier. She tapped her screen and held it up. The photo nearly made me drop the bag in my hands. Across the front of the house, stretched from one porch post to the other, was a massive white banner. Bold red letters screamed across it, "Congratulations, Peyton, for saving the family home." I stood frozen. My mind scrambled to process it, but the words kept burning into me like a brand. Saving the family home? I felt the blood drain from my face. My throat closed so tight it hurt to breathe. "Mrs." Whitman shifted awkwardly, maybe sensing she'd just delivered a gut punch. "Anyway, I thought you should know." Then she gave a small wave and left. The door shut and I leaned against it, gripping the bag of groceries until the paper tore. Apples rolled across the floor, but I couldn't even move. My entire body shook with a mix of rage and disbelief. $84,000, 36 months, 3 years of sacrifice they had begged for, taken, and then erased with a single banner. Not ignored, this time erased. Worse, they handed the credit to Peyton like I'd never existed at all. I dropped onto the couch, pulled my hands through my hair, and stared at the ceiling. The memories rushed back one after another. The late-night calls, Mom's trembling voice saying, "Just this once," Dad's hollow promise, "Next month we'll manage on our own." All of it, every dime, every sacrifice rewritten as my sister's victory. I tried to laugh, but it came out bitter and cracked. The audacity of it, the cruelty wrapped up in a fake celebration. They hadn't just dismissed me at that dinner table, they had built a whole lie around Peyton, complete with decorations. I grabbed the folder from my dining table and flipped it open, pages spilling everywhere. Bank transfers, receipts, all neatly logged. The evidence screamed louder than any banner ever could. Without me, that house would have been gone 2 years ago. Without me, Mom and Dad would have been packing boxes while Peyton was busy redecorating her new kitchen. But instead of gratitude, they'd put her on a pedestal and crowned her the savior. I stared at the papers long enough for my eyes to blur. Then I wiped them hard, stood up, and started pacing. The anger didn't consume me, it clarified me. If this was the story they wanted to sell, then I needed to decide how far I was willing to go to tell the real one. That night, I barely slept. My laptop glowed in the dark as I opened a blank spreadsheet. I entered every payment, every date, every amount. January, $1,500. February, $2,000. March, $1,200. 36 rows later, the total glared from the bottom cell. $84,000. I stared at the number until my vision blurred again. This wasn't just money. This was my 20s, my future, my shot at buying a home of my own. Next, I pulled up my phone, scrolling through the texts Mom had sent me over the years. "Jordan, sweetheart, the company hasn't bounced back yet. If you don't help this time, the bank will take the house. Please, just this once." I screenshot everyone. Then I dropped them into the report, labeling each message by date. Side by side with the transfers, the picture was undeniable. It wasn't generosity. It wasn't some one-off favor. It was systematic, month after month, disguised as desperate emergencies that never ended. By 3 a.m., I had built the kind of briefing deck Knox would have been proud of. Clean, organized, impossible to argue with. A timeline on one slide, a bar chart on the next, a final total bolded in red at the end. At the bottom I typed one sentence: "Without me, there would be no home to hang a banner on." When I closed the laptop, I didn't feel tired. I felt steady. The following Monday, I walked into work with the same calm, but something inside me burned hotter. While others chatted about weekend plans, I couldn't shake the thought of that banner. I carried the folder in my bag, heavy but grounding, like a weapon waiting to be drawn. During lunch, Knox stopped by my table. "Hale, you look like someone about to go into battle." I smirked. "Maybe I am, sir. Just not the kind you'd expect." He studied me for a second, then nodded slowly. "Then fight it the same way you fight anything else prepared, precise, and without flinching." "No." His words locked into place. This wasn't going to be screaming across a dinner table anymore. This wasn't going to be whispered bitterness. If my parents wanted to build a fake legend around Peyton, then I'd make sure everyone saw the truth, and the truth would speak louder than any of their denials. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened the laptop again and ran through the slides like I was practicing for a briefing to command staff. My voice came out firm, my pacing steady. The The numbers weren't just figures on a screen, they were my story. For years, I'd let them paint me as invisible. Now I was going to force them to look. I saved the file 3 times. Once on my laptop, once on a USB drive, and once to the cloud. Then I slipped the USB into a small black case and set it beside the folder of bank statements on the table. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and let the weight of it settle. They could hang banners. They could toast Peyton. They could twist the story until it was unrecognizable. But I had the proof. And if the truth embarrassed them, that wasn't my fault. For the first time, I wasn't just imagining standing up to them. I was preparing for it. The hum of my laptop filled the room as the first draft of my slides glowed across the screen. I'd built reports before, budgets, logistics plans, operational analyses, but this one wasn't for the Army. This one was for me. My own mission. My own operation. I called it Operation Homefront in the file name. Every slide was a strike. The opening was clean, a timeline of dates and dollar amounts, black on white, nothing flashy. Then the bar chart 36 months lined up, each bar taller than the last, climbing until the total screamed across the top. After that came the screenshots, my mother's texts in her own words. Just this once. If you don't, we'll lose the house. Her pleas stacked one after another until the pattern was undeniable. I made sure every element looked polished. I knew my parents, they thrived on deflection. They'd call me dramatic, ungrateful, sensitive. But they couldn't argue with numbers, not when they were projected 10 feet high on a screen for everyone to see. When I leaned back from the desk, exhaustion tugged at me, but the fire didn't dim. I saved the deck again, hard drive, USB, cloud backup. If one failed, I'd still have the others. Years in logistics taught me redundancies weren't optional. They were survival. The folder of bank statements sat beside the laptop, thick and heavy. I'd added tabs for easy navigation, labeled by year, 2020, 2021, 2022. Each section stacked with transfers that matched the slides. If anyone doubted the deck, the paper trail would back it up. I knew I couldn't wing this. I needed control over the environment. That's when Sarah, my cousin, called. She was one of the few relatives who still checked in, usually with little things, holiday invites, birthday wishes. But her tone this time was cautious. Jordan, your parents asked me to help with the family appreciation dinner. Big event. They want a slideshow about Peyton keeping the house. I clenched the phone tighter. They really said that? Yeah, she sighed. I thought it was weird. I mean, everyone knows Peyton didn't actually. She trailed off. Sarah, listen, I cut in. Can you send me the file they gave you? I have some ideas. She hesitated. Jordan, if I do that, I'm stuck in the middle. You're already in the middle, I said. But you know the truth. Just trust me. A pause. Then the ding of a new email came through minutes later. I opened the slideshow. Photos of the house. My parents smiling on the porch. Peyton front and center with captions like, "Our pride and thank you, Peyton, for preserving the family home." My jaw tightened. They weren't just rewriting history. They were publishing it. I copied the file, renamed it, and got to work. I left the first slides untouched. Family photos, smiling faces, Peyton in her emerald dress. It would all look normal until the moment I switched it. Then my slides would roll. The timeline, the chart, the text, the $84,000 bold across the screen. The final slide was the house itself, with one line beneath it. This was my contribution. Don't erase it. I ran through the sequence twice, 3 times, until I could picture every beat of the room's reaction. Shock. Silence. The whispers starting at the corners. Peyton's face flushing. My parents frozen. That was the goal, not revenge for the sake of revenge, but truth so undeniable it cracked their performance wide open. I didn't just prepare the digital version. I printed copies of the report, bound them neatly, and slipped them into my bag. If someone tried to shut down the projector, I'd have hard copies to hand out. No escape. No erasing me again. For days, my apartment looked like a war room. Papers stacked, USB drives lined up, sticky notes on the wall with reminders. Keep calm. Don't yell. Let the numbers speak. Knox noticed my intensity. During a logistics drill, he pulled me aside again. Hale, you're running like you're prepping for inspection from God himself. I smirked. Something like that, sir. His eyes narrowed. He wasn't a man you lied to, but I couldn't exactly tell him I was planning a family ambush. He gave a short nod. Remember, when the pressure's on, your tone is half the battle. Calm is control. Don't let anyone drag you into noise. That advice seared into me. This wouldn't be about shouting over my parents or Peyton. It would be about standing so steady that everyone else felt the imbalance. The night before the dinner, I rehearsed one last time. I dimmed the lights, projected the slides onto my wall, and walked through each one as if the room were full. My voice didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. When the final slide appeared, I spoke the line I'd been carrying for weeks. If the truth embarrasses you, that isn't my fault. The words hung in the air of my apartment. They didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a verdict. I packed the folder, slipped the USB into its case, and placed them both on the dining table. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and stared at them. This wasn't about proving I was better than Peyton. It wasn't about humiliating my parents. It was about balance. About ending 3 years of silence that had swallowed me whole. For once, I wasn't dreading a family gathering. I wasn't walking into it braced for another round of comparisons or dismissals. I was walking in armed, not with bitterness, but with truth. And no matter how they reacted, no matter how the room shifted, the one thing I knew for certain was that they wouldn't erase me again. The restaurant glowed with soft golden lights, the kind meant to make people feel like they were walking into a celebration. From the parking lot, I could already spot the cars of aunts, uncles, and cousins. Inside, the air buzzed with chatter, glasses clinking, and laughter floating over the tables. But under all that noise, I knew exactly what this night was really about. I paused just inside the doorway. My father stood at the head of the room in a dark suit, shoulders pulled back like he was about to deliver a keynote address. Mom sat near him, beaming, her hands folded neatly in her lap. And there she was, Peyton front and center in an emerald dress, her hair pinned perfectly, smiling like the guest of honor she believed she was. I slipped into the back corner unnoticed. I wanted to watch them first, to see how they performed before I tore it apart. Dad tapped the microphone and cleared his throat. The room hushed instantly. Thank you all for being here tonight. We are blessed with family, and we are especially blessed with a daughter who kept our home alive when times were tough. Peyton, your sacrifice and your strength carried us through. The applause started before he even finished the sentence. Glasses raised, relatives nodding, eyes turned toward my sister like she was the reason the roof hadn't caved in. Peyton lowered her head just enough to look modest while soaking in every ounce of credit. I sat there, pulse steady, fingers wrapped around the black case in my bag where the USB waited. The slideshow began. Familiar images filled the big screen: snow on the roof, spring flowers in the yard, Peyton posing in front of the porch like it was her throne. Captions glowed in bold letters. Our pride. Our rock. Thank you, Peyton. Each one landed like a slap, not because I hadn't expected it, but because of how smoothly the lie played out, how eagerly everyone accepted it. The final slide was supposed to end the show. Peyton smiling in front of the house, the words, "Preserving the family home," stretched across the bottom. Instead, the screen flickered. The room stilled. Then my first slide appeared. Financial contributions. 2020, 2023. The chart filled the screen, 36 bars climbing month after month, numbers stacked neatly above them. The room went dead silent. Forks hovered midair. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. I stood then, every eye snapping to me. My heels clicked against the wood floor as I walked to the front, the folder under my arm, my chin lifted. When I reached the head of the table, I spoke clearly, slow enough for everyone to catch each word. If the truth embarrasses you, that isn't my fault. And the silence thickened, then gasps broke it. My uncle leaned to whisper to his wife. My aunt's jaw dropped. Peyton's smile crumbled. I clicked to the next slide. A timeline appeared. January 2000 and $21,500. February 2000 and $22,000. On and on it went. The numbers marched across the screen, like soldiers in formation. This, I said, tapping the pointer against the slide, is 3 years of payments, my payments. $84,000 wired straight into my parents' account. Without it, this house everyone here is celebrating tonight would have been gone. Murmurs rose around the room. Heads turned. Some relatives frowned. Others looked at my parents in disbelief. Mom's face flushed, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Dad gripped the microphone tighter, knuckles white. I switched to the next slide. Screenshots of texts appeared. Jordan, please, just this once. The bank will take the house if you don't. Your father lost the contract. We'll pay you back next month. Gasps rippled again, this time sharper, angrier. My cousin at the far table whispered loud enough for others to hear. She carried it all this time? I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to accuse. The evidence spoke for me. I held up the bound report in my hand. Every receipt, every transfer, every text, it's all here. 3 years of sacrifice, not Peyton's, mine. Peyton's eyes darted to the floor, her cheeks burning red. She opened her mouth like she wanted to deny it, then shut it again. I looked directly at my parents. You hung a banner crediting her. You planned this dinner to celebrate her. And you erased me. But the truth doesn't vanish just because you refuse to see it. The whispers grew into open voices now. An uncle muttered, I knew something didn't add up. An aunt shook her head. How could you let Jordan pay all that and then give the credit away? Mom finally found her voice, but it cracked as she spoke. Jordan, we didn't mean... I cut her off, calm but sharp. You didn't mean to admit it. You didn't mean to give me credit. You didn't mean to tell the truth. That's what you didn't mean. Dad's jaw clenched. This is not the place. This is exactly the place, I said. You invited everyone here to celebrate a lie. I'm just showing them the truth. I let the silence hang again. Then I turned to the final slide, the house glowing in summer light, the caption underneath simple, this was my contribution. Don't erase it. The room erupted. Not applause, not yet, but a swell of voices, some supportive, some shocked, some demanding answers. My mother sat frozen, eyes glassy. My father stared at the floor, lips pressed tight. Peyton buried her face in her hands. I stood in the center of it all, steady. I didn't need them to clap. I didn't need them to forgive me or condemn me. I just needed them to see me. And they did. Every single one of them. I closed the laptop, slipped the folder back under my arm, and looked at my parents one last time. 3 years. $84,000. You can call it disrespectful. You can call it sensitive. But you can't call it a lie. Then I stepped away from the table, leaving the truth hanging in the air like a banner no one could take down. The hum of the projector was the only sound at first. Then a slow, hesitant clap broke the silence. One relative. Then another. Within seconds, the applause swelled until it filled the room, uneven but unmistakable. Not everyone joined in, some sat frozen, some whispered, but enough hands came together to shift the air. I didn't move. I let it happen around me. My parents sat stiff, pale as statues, staring at the screen where $84,000 still glowed. Peyton's hands trembled in her lap, her emerald dress catching the light but no longer making her shine. Aunt Carol shook her head, her voice sharp. I knew something was off. How could you let Jordan take all that on and then parade Peyton as the hero? Another voice chimed in from across the table. I remember Jordan working crazy hours back then. Now it makes sense. The whispers became a current, each one digging deeper into the carefully built story my parents had tried to sell. Dad finally spoke, gripping the mic like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Enough. This is family business, not something to air out here. His voice cracked on the last word. I turned toward him, steady. You made it everyone's business the moment you invited the whole family to celebrate a lie. I didn't bring the spotlight, you did. I'm just showing what's under it. The murmurs grew louder. Mom's face was red, her lips trembling as she tried to form words, but no explanation came. Peyton finally looked up, eyes glassy. For a moment, our gazes locked. She wanted me to bail her out, to soften the blow, but I wasn't there to save her. Not this time. I raised the bound report high enough for everyone to see. Every dollar, every text, every promise is here. You don't have to take my word for it. The truth is in black and white. End of. I set the report on the table in front of my father, right on top of his untouched dinner plate. He flinched as if the weight of the binder burned. "I don't need applause," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "I don't need a banner. I don't even need your thanks. But I will not be erased. Not again." The room went still. Relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding eye contact with my parents, others looking at me with something close to admiration. My father's knuckles whitened around the microphone. "You're humiliating this family." I leaned forward just enough for my voice to carry. "No, I'm not humiliating the family. I'm humiliating the lie. If that feels the same to you, maybe you should ask yourself why." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy. The kind of silence that makes people rethink what they just witnessed. I glanced at Peyton one last time. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She sat there like the ground had been pulled out from under her, the shine of the golden child slipping away in real time. Turning back to the room, I spoke slowly. 3 years, $84,000. Without it, that house would have been gone. You can deny it, but you can't erase it. Not anymore. Then I closed the laptop, tucked the USB back into its case, and straightened my uniform jacket. That's all I came here to say. I didn't wait for permission to leave. I didn't wait for excuses or apologies. I stepped away from the table, my heels striking the wood floor in a rhythm louder than any applause. The room stayed hushed as I passed, except for the low murmur of relatives piecing together what they had just seen. Some eyes followed me with pity, others with respect, but none looked at me like a shadow anymore. At the door, my mother's voice cracked behind me. "Jordan?" I didn't turn. I didn't need to. The cool night air hit me as the door closed behind me, fresh air filling my lungs like I hadn't breathed in years. The city lights shimmered across the street, steady and unbothered, as if the storm inside that restaurant had never happened. I walked to my car with the folder under my arm, not gloating, not shaking, just lighter. For 3 years, I'd carried the weight of silence. Tonight, I set it down where everyone could see it. As I slid into the driver's seat, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't see the invisible daughter, the quiet sister, the backup role in someone else's play. I saw someone who had finally taken her own place in the story, not by begging for it, but by demanding it with proof. I started the engine, the steady hum filling the quiet night, and pulled out of the lot. My parents could keep their banners. My sister could keep her dress and her silence. What I had was unshakable, the truth, and that was enough. 2 mornings later, a knock rattled my apartment door just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee. I peeked through the peephole and felt my chest tighten. Mom and Dad stood there. He looked smaller than I remembered, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, eyes downcast. Mom's face was pale, her eyes swollen as though she hadn't slept since the dinner. I opened the door but didn't step aside right away. For once, I made them wait. Finally, I moved back and let them in. The space felt even brighter with them standing there, completely out of place in my clean, ordered apartment. Mom broke the silence first, her voice trembling. "Jordan, I'm sorry. We were wrong to stay quiet, wrong to let Peyton take the credit. We didn't realize how much you'd sacrificed." I didn't speak. I just watched her, waiting. Dad cleared his throat, trying to sound firm, but failing. "We've talked about it. We want to add your name to the deed. You deserve that. You saved the house." For a second, the old Jordan, the one who used to ache for their approval, almost surfaced. But then I glanced around my apartment. The walls painted in colors I chose, the desk where I worked late into the night, the keys sitting on the counter that unlocked a door only I controlled. I didn't need their deed anymore. I shook my head. I have a home now. I don't need to be tied to that house or that past. Mom's lips trembled. "But you earned it. You should be recognized." I set my coffee mug down and looked her square in the eye. "What I deserve is respect, and you didn't give me that. Not then, not when I needed it." The words cut deeper than any chart or slide I'd presented at the dinner. Dad's face tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew there wasn't a defense left. They stood in silence for a long moment, shifting uncomfortably in the space that was undeniably mine. Finally, Mom nodded faintly, tears brimming again. "We can't undo what we did, but we're sorry." I let out a long breath, not angry, not forgiving, just resolved. "I'm not looking for your apology. I'm looking for distance. I'm building something for myself now, and I won't let you rewrite it. Mom looked away. Dad pressed his lips together, and I walked them to the door. When it shut behind them, the quiet that filled the room wasn't heavy, it was freeing. I leaned against the door, letting my shoulders drop, realizing just how far I'd come from that girl who sat silently at dinner while Peyton soaked up applause. The days that followed carried their own kind of shift. My phone buzzed with texts from relatives, some offering support, others fishing for gossip. I responded to none. The truth was already out. I didn't need to relive it in endless conversations. At work, I felt the difference too. I walked into meetings taller, not because anything external had changed, but because I wasn't carrying the invisible weight anymore. When Knox assigned me to lead a critical logistics plan for a training exercise, I dove in headfirst, and my team followed without hesitation. One afternoon after the exercise, Knox caught me in the hallway. "You've been sharper than ever, Hale. Whatever storm you went through, it forged you." I gave a small smile. "Storms have a way of doing that, sir." "I'm sending." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Fort Belvoir's request list is opening soon. You should put your name in. You're ready." The idea didn't scare me anymore. It felt like the next logical step. Moving closer to DC, taking on bigger responsibilities, starting over in a place where nobody tied me to my parents' shadow. It wasn't running away. It was moving forward. That night, I logged into a real estate site and browsed condos in Alexandria. Not because I needed to escape my current apartment, but because I wanted to choose a place entirely on my own terms. No shared deeds, no family strings, just mine. Meanwhile, Peyton tried to reach out once. A short text. "You didn't have to do it like that." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without replying. For years, I hadn't had a voice. Now that I did, I wasn't going to waste it on explaining myself to someone who never once defended me. The truth was, Peyton wasn't the villain. She was the beneficiary of silence. But silence was gone now, and so was the pedestal. On a crisp Saturday, I packed a duffel bag, drove to the trailhead outside the city, and hiked until the noise of everything else fell away. At the summit, looking out at the spread of pines and the faint stretch of skyline in the distance, I let myself breathe. $84,000. 3 years. Every sacrifice had built not just resentment, but resilience. The army had trained me to endure, but my family had unwittingly trained me to stand. When I got back down, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt prepared. Whatever came next, new station, new home, new battles, I wasn't dragging their weight with me. And as I unlocked my apartment door that evening, the space felt like more than walls and furniture. It felt like proof. Proof that I had drawn a line, kept it, and chosen myself. Orders came through in the spring. PCS to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. I'd half expected it after Knox's hint, but seeing the paperwork in my inbox made it real. Most people groan at new orders, packing, moving, starting over, but when I saw my name, I smiled. This wasn't disruption. This was the reset button I'd been waiting for. The next weeks became a blur of logistics. My apartment filled with boxes, labels scrawled across every side. Army life had trained me to move light, but this time I took my time. Every item I packed was deliberate, chosen because I wanted it, not because it was handed down or expected. When I taped the last box shut, I looked around at the empty walls and thought about how far I'd come since that first night I canceled the transfers. The drive up to Virginia was long, but not lonely. My car was packed with everything that mattered, and the open road felt like a clean slate. Crossing into Alexandria, I saw the city skyline stretched against the river and felt a rush of anticipation. This wasn't North Carolina, where I had carried the burden. This was mine to claim. Within a week of arriving, I found a one-bedroom condo near Old Town. It wasn't big, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew it was right. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, bouncing off polished wood floors. The balcony overlooked a stretch of brick-lined streets dotted with coffee shops and bookstores. It felt alive, not weighed down by history I didn't want. Signing the papers, holding the keys, I didn't feel nervous. I felt steady. I wasn't tethered to anyone else's choices anymore. This was the product of my career, my sacrifices, my truth. Work at Fort Belvoir hit fast. Higher tempo, bigger responsibilities, tighter scrutiny. But I thrived in it. I was assigned to oversee financial operations for a multi-branch logistics project, and for the first time, I wasn't quietly proving myself in the shadows. My reports landed on the desks of senior officers. My briefings filled conference rooms. And every nod of approval came without the filter of family bias, just performance. Knox called once, checking in from back at Bragg. "How's Belvoir treating you?" I laughed. "It's like drinking from a fire hose, sir. But I can handle it. Now." "You always could," he said. "You just stopped wasting energy on people who didn't see it." He was right. My energy wasn't split anymore. I wasn't funding anyone else's stability at the cost of my own. Every paycheck built my savings. Every project stacked another block of credibility in my career. Evenings in Alexandria felt different too. I ran along the Potomac, the city lights flickering across the water. I met neighbors who didn't know a thing about my family, only that I was the soldier in the building who kept odd hours and carried herself like she had a mission. I cooked in my own kitchen, decorated walls with photos from hikes and travels, not family portraits where my name was left out of the story. The phone calls from home came less often. When they did, they were shorter. My parents knew the line had been drawn. Peyton didn't text again. The silence wasn't hostile, it was just distance. Exactly the space I needed. One Saturday morning, I sat on my balcony with coffee, scrolling through my finances. My savings account had already grown more in 6 months than it had in the last 3 years combined. The number on the screen wasn't huge, but it was clean, untouched, mine. I thought back to the banner, the slideshow, the night I walked out of that restaurant. For a long time, I'd replayed it in my head, like a scar that wouldn't fade. But sitting there in the sun, I realized it had become something else. Not a scar, but a marker. The exact point where I stopped living for someone else and started living for me. Later that day, I walked through Old Town, the streets buzzing with tourists and locals. I stopped at a bookstore, bought a novel I'd never have picked up before, just because I could. No guilt about spending the money, no second-guessing if I should save it for another emergency. It was such a small act, but it felt revolutionary. At work, the tempo only increased. I was asked to present at a joint logistics symposium, standing in front of officers who outranked me by decades. My presentation ran like clockwork charts, forecasts, solutions. When I finished, the applause was brief but firm. One colonel shook my hand afterward and said, "We need more officers who talk straight, not in circles. Good work, Hale." I sick. That moment landed deeper than any empty praise I'd chased at home. It was recognition I earned, not one filtered through comparison or pity. Walking back to my office, I thought about how different my story looked now. Not erased, not twisted, not hidden. It was mine, written one decision at a time. I spent evenings setting up my condo exactly the way I wanted. A gray sofa, a tall bookshelf filled with finance texts and novels. Plants I might kill but wanted anyway. A framed map of the U.S. pinned with every place the Army had sent me. And on my desk, in a neat black folder, I kept the bank statements and report the evidence of those 3 years. Not because I needed to wave it around anymore, but because it reminded me of what I had overcome. Some nights, I'd flip through it briefly, then close it again. Not bitter, just grounded. Those pages weren't my identity anymore, they were proof of why I'd never go back to silence. One evening, as the sun dipped over the Potomac, I stood on my balcony and let the breeze wash over me. My life wasn't perfect. The Army was still the Army: stress, deployments, endless checklists, but the weight I carried was my own now. And that made all the difference. For the first time in years, the thought in my head was simple. I wasn't a shadow. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a daughter defined by someone else's banner. I was Captain Jordan Hale, soldier, leader, homeowner. A woman who had chosen truth over silence, self-respect over approval, and a future built on her own terms. And that was enough. When I look back, I don't see a family dinner or a banner anymore. I see the moment I stopped letting other people write my story. 3 years of sacrifice taught me how far I could bend without breaking. But speaking the truth taught me I never had to bend that far again. The Army gave me discipline, but my family gave me the lesson I carry every day. Respect isn't handed out, it's claimed. I didn't win by humiliating anyone. I won by refusing to disappear. And if there's one thing I know now, It's this silence protects lies, but truth builds freedom.